What would your younger self say about how your family turned out?
Every family has its little rituals, those predictable rhythms that return year after year like a bad holiday song you can't stop humming. For my family, Christmas wasn't just about tree decorating or baking sugar cookies. It was a performance. A full-on, glimmering, painfully choreographed spectacle in which my younger brother, Ryan, always played the lead, charming, dramatic, center stage, while I stood just off to the side, clapping politely, pretending not to notice that my part was shrinking year after year until eventually, I was barely in the frame. I remember the first time I really noticed it. I was probably 13, which would have made Ryan 8. We were sitting cross-legged in front of the fireplace, the tree blinking behind us, our parents beaming proudly like they were watching a school play. Mom handed Ryan a large, neatly wrapped box with a thick satin ribbon, not the flimsy dollar store kind, but the kind that looks like it belongs on a wedding gift. He tore into it like only a child high on cocoa and sugar could, and inside was a brand new Nintendo GameCube. Top of the line at the time. Meanwhile, I opened my own smaller gift and found a paperback copy of Little Women and a knitted scarf with a note that read, "We're cutting back this year. Love you, honey." At the time, I told myself I was being ungrateful. I pushed the bitterness down and swallowed it with a tight smile. But that was the first time the words "cutting back" started to echo in my mind, like a polite little excuse that kept showing up whenever it was time to split love in monetary form. And every year after that, it became more noticeable, more obvious. Ryan's gifts got shinier, trendier, more expensive. Mine got smaller. One year, it was a Target bathrobe and a cookbook I'd never asked for. Another year, it was a coffee mug with my name misspelled on it. No joke. Danielle. The tag was even crossed out and rewritten. And I never said a damn thing. Not once did I call it out. Not once did I ruin Christmas by asking why the cutting back never seemed to apply to Ryan's Gucci shoes or the MacBook he got when he flunked out of college and wanted to pivot into something creative. I played along, laughed when expected, thanked them graciously, and held on to the belief that maybe next year things would even out. Maybe they were just having a rough patch. Maybe they didn't realize what they were doing. But I'm not stupid. I've worked with men in suits who lie straight to your face and smile while doing it. I know what favoritism looks like when it hides behind tradition. And I know what it feels like to be invisible in a room full of people who call you family. Ryan always knew how to work the room. That's the thing. He didn't even have to try. He was loud, funny, good-looking in a cocky kind of way, and always just chaotic enough to be endearing. Parents love that. They find it charming. He's just figuring things out, they'd say, even after his third failed business and 2 generous loans from Dad. Meanwhile, I was over here holding down a stable career in tech, paying off my mortgage early and buying my own birthday cakes because no one remembered if I liked vanilla or chocolate. It's not that I wanted a damn Gucci bag. I'm not materialistic. I didn't need designer labels or flashy tech. I just wanted it to feel equal. To feel like maybe I was part of the same story, not just a quiet footnote in Ryan's highlight reel. And every Christmas, when the wrapping paper settled and the fake gratitude faded, I'd drive home with a sinking weight in my chest, wondering if this was just how it was going to be for the rest of my life. Last year, I got a candle. A sandalwood sage-scented candle with one of those fake handwritten labels that said something like, "Breathe in, let go." Ryan got a Montblanc pen and a leather jacket from Saks. Mom said they were practical gifts. Dad just nodded like he'd already checked out. I drove home alone that night in the rain, holding the candle in my lap like it was radioactive, and I remember thinking, not with rage, not even with sadness, but with this strange kind of numb clarity, that I didn't belong here. Not really. I was tolerated. Not celebrated. A background character in a story I didn't write. But this year something shifted. It wasn't sudden. I didn't wake up one morning with a plan or a burning need to prove something. It was quieter than that. More like a door that had been locked for decades slowly creaking open. You see, something big happened in October. I got promoted. Not just a step up, not just a new title to slap on LinkedIn. I became a vice president at my firm. Tech infrastructure. Boring to most people, but critical and high-paying. The bonus alone was over 6 figures, and the salary hike was enough to make my eyes blur when I saw the number in print. And the first thing I felt when I read the offer? Shame. Not pride. Not joy. Shame. Because I knew that I wouldn't tell my family. Isn't that something? That's how deep it went. That's how far I'd twisted myself to fit into their narrative. I couldn't even imagine picking up the phone and sharing my biggest win, because I could already hear the awkward silence on the other end, the obligatory, "Wow, that's great," from mom while she scrolled through Ryan's latest crypto meme account, or dad muttering, "Good for you," like he was reading off a fortune cookie. So I told no one. I smiled at work, celebrated with a few colleagues, and went home that night and ordered takeout for one. And that's when the idea started forming. Not a plan. Not revenge. Just something different. A shift. A tiny voice in the back of my mind whispering, what if this year you didn't pretend? What if you didn't play along? What if you gave yourself something no one else ever did, recognition? I didn't act on it right away. I waited. I watched. I let the family group chat roll into its usual December chaos. Mom sending her annual list of requested dish contributions like she was managing a wedding. Ryan posting a boomerang of some unboxing video. Dad forwarding some political chain message to the wrong thread. Same circus, different tent. I smiled. And I said nothing. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's just the sound of a woman standing back, not because she's given up, but because she's about to step forward in a way no one saw coming. And this year, I was done waiting to be seen. There's a strange kind of silence that comes after achieving something you've spent your whole adult life working toward, especially when the people who were supposed to cheer you on are the same ones you've learned to hide your victories from. I didn't tell them about the promotion, not because I wanted to keep secrets, and not because it wasn't a big deal, but because I already knew exactly what would happen if I did. I knew the rhythm of that conversation by heart, the flat congratulations, the disinterested tone, the subtle pivot back to Ryan, whose problems were always just big enough to suck the oxygen out of every room he walked into. I didn't want my win turned into a sidebar in someone else's story, so I chose not to tell them at all. The promotion came after months of pushing harder than I ever had before. It wasn't handed to me, and it wasn't something I lobbied for with flair and flash like Ryan would've. I worked late nights, absorbed projects nobody else wanted, held entire teams together with duct tape and discipline, and when the former VP left without warning, I didn't volunteer. I just kept showing up until no one could imagine anyone else in the role. They made it official on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was called into a corner office, offered a leather seat, and handed a thick manila folder. When I opened it and saw the offer, the title, the number, the benefits, my first instinct wasn't joy, or pride, or even relief. It was confusion. Because after years of being invisible in one world, I had suddenly become undeniable in another, and I didn't quite know what to do with that. So I went home, changed into sweatpants, ordered Thai food from the same place I always did, and sat on my living room floor with the lights off, just staring at the unopened fortune cookie they threw into the bag. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post about it. I didn't even tell my best friend until 2 days later, and even then I made it sound smaller than it was, like I didn't want to tempt fate by enjoying it too much. But it wasn't humility. It was programming. When you grow up as the supporting act to someone else's spotlight, you learn not to step too far forward, even when you've earned every inch of the stage. It's funny, in a way, my job requires constant communication, leadership, strategy, all those buzzwords you slap onto resumes to sound important, and I'm good at it. I'm not flashy, I don't bark orders, I don't dominate meetings, but I get things done, and people respect me for it. And yet in my family, I was still the girl who works with computers, the one who brought boring salads to Christmas dinner, the one who never made a scene, never dated anyone dramatic, never caused problems. I was the default responsible one, the quiet one, the one they didn't worry about because I never gave them a reason to. But what no one tells you is that being the one no one worries about doesn't feel like freedom, it feels like isolation. It feels like being the designated adult in a house where everyone else is allowed to be children forever. Ryan's bad investments were seen as ambition. His messy breakups were proof of his passion. His debt was just a temporary setback. But if I so much as brought up a bad day, I was met with blank stares and suggestions to treat yourself to a bath. The expectations were uneven from the beginning, and it only widened as we got older. Ryan failed upward. I succeeded silently. So I kept my win quiet. And the silence felt good. Not because I didn't want to share it, but because, for once, it was mine. Entirely mine. No watered-down praise, no sarcastic remarks from my brother, no polite deflections from my mother. Just me, sitting in my apartment with a new title, a bonus I hadn't even spent yet, and a growing sense that I didn't owe anyone the details. That's when the idea began to sharpen. I had already been considering buying a new car. My Honda was nearly a decade old, still ran fine, but made a clicking sound when I turned too hard and smelled faintly like gym socks and old coffee. I hadn't made a major purchase in years, not because I couldn't, but because I was always planning for what came next, the just-in-case fund, the what-if-I-lose-my-job fund, the maybe one day I'll feel like I deserve something nice fund. But this time, I didn't want to plan. I wanted to act. To give myself something tangible, something undeniable, something I could look at and say, you earned this and no one can take it from you. I didn't tell my parents about the car either. Not at first. They wouldn't have understood. They would have said it was impractical, too flashy, not like me. They'd wonder why I didn't just buy something sensible. They would have missed the point entirely. This wasn't about the car. It was about the principle. About reclaiming space. About reminding myself, not them, not anyone else, that I had value, and that I could choose to be seen, even if they never learned how to see me. I started researching models. Not browsing. Researching. Like a project. Because that's what I'm good at, diving deep, gathering facts, weighing pros and cons until there's no room left for doubt. And every night, after answering emails and closing spreadsheets and reviewing project plans, I'd sit at my kitchen table and scroll through options. Colors, specs, interiors. White felt right. Clean. Timeless. Unapologetic. No frills, no gimmicks. Just presence. By mid-December, I had made the decision. I was buying a Tesla. Pearl white. Fully loaded. Paid in full. But I didn't rush. I let the holidays creep in. Let the familiar chatter take over the family group chat, mom assigning casseroles, dad forwarding bad jokes, Ryan posting photos of some brunch with friends I'd never met. I stayed quiet. I said nothing. I watched the countdown to Christmas begin like it always did, with baked-in expectations and an undercurrent of performance. But this year, I had no intention of playing my usual part. No polite laughter. No forced gratitude. No fake surprise over a $10 planner and a soy candle with a passive-aggressive label. I was waiting. Waiting for the moment that would change everything, not for them, but for me. Because when you've been invisible long enough, there's nothing quite like choosing to be seen on your own terms. And the delivery date was set. December 23rd. There are very few moments in life when you can feel something shifting, not gradually, not with the slow erosion of time, but instantly. The way a thunderclap splits a sky wide open, or the way an elevator drops a floor too fast and steals your breath. Standing inside the Tesla delivery center that morning, watching the glass doors slide open to reveal the car I had chosen, paid for, and waited for with the kind of quiet patience only an oldest daughter learns to perfect, I knew that everything, from this point forward, would fall into a before and after. Before I decided to stop being overlooked, and after I took back the narrative they had written for me without asking if I ever agreed to the role they handed me. The place was clinical, modern, efficient, the kind of space designed to impress without feeling warm, which suited me just fine. A man in a slate-colored polo shirt with a name tag that barely hung on his chest led me across the polished floor to where my Model Y was parked, angled slightly as if it had been waiting for me for years. Pearl white. The kind of white that doesn't shout, doesn't beg for attention, but commands it quietly and with purpose. The color of clean slates and blank pages. I walked around it slowly, taking in every curve and line, not with awe, but with a strange sense of recognition, like seeing a version of myself that had always existed just under the surface, sleek, capable, unbothered. I signed the last few papers, took the virtual key in the form of a slim card that felt almost too light for what it represented, and stepped into the driver's seat. The silence was the first thing that struck me, not the absence of sound, but the presence of calm. No clunky ignition, no hum of a struggling engine, just the quiet confidence of something built to move without noise. I sat there for a few minutes, not starting the car, not doing anything, just letting the moment settle over me like a second skin. And then, with the kind of deliberate calm I'd learned to cultivate after years of being dismissed and talked over, I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, opened the camera app, and hit record. I didn't say a word in the video. There was no narration, no commentary, no explanation. Just a slow, steady shot of the car, the Tesla badge gleaming under the winter sun, the interior with its minimalist dashboard and touchscreen display, and finally, a brief clip of me stepping inside, closing the door, and looking into the lens for less than 2 seconds before turning off the camera. No forced smile, no smugness, no need to oversell the moment. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just documenting something real, something that mattered, not because of the price tag, but because of what it symbolized. And then I posted it. Not on social media, not for the world to see or comment on with heart emojis and fake excitement. No, I posted it exactly where I knew it would be seen, where the effect would ripple in exactly the way I intended. I opened the family group chat Fam Bam, the same recycled title we'd used since group texts became a thing, filled with photos of Ryan's dog, Dad's endless barbecue photos, and Mom's chaotic recipe screenshots, and I dropped the video in. With nothing but a short, simple message beneath it, early Christmas gift to myself. Delivered today. Then I locked my phone and drove. I didn't check the responses, didn't wait for the usual flood of reactions. I knew them already. I knew the order they would come in, like lines in a badly written play where the actors never deviate. Ryan would respond first, because he always needed to be first, maybe a sarcastic "look at you," or some attempt at humor masking his discomfort. Then Mom, carefully tiptoeing around any hint of disapproval while radiating confusion, would send something benign and meaningless like, "That's wow," or "big purchase." Dad wouldn't say much. Not right away, he rarely did, but when he did, it would likely be a passive-aggressive question about maintenance costs or insurance. That was their rhythm. Their dance. I didn't need to see it to hear it in my head. But I didn't care. For the first time in years, maybe in my whole life, I didn't need their approval, their praise, or even their recognition. The car wasn't about rubbing anything in. It wasn't about making a scene or creating drama. It was about no longer pretending that my life, my success, my accomplishments had to remain under wraps so someone else could shine brighter without shadows. It was a line in the sand. A declaration, not spoken out loud, but driven silently down the highway with the windows up and the heater on full blast, the snow melting on the windshield and my breath steady, and even for the first time in weeks. The Tesla moved like it was designed for people who were tired of explaining themselves. Smooth, quiet, direct. Every detail of it, every inch of stitched leather, every blink of the touchscreen, felt like a kind of permission I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for. Permission to take up space. Permission to exist loudly in the life I'd built, even if no one had ever clapped for me while I was building it. When I finally pulled into my garage, shut off the engine, and sat in the stillness, my phone buzzed. Just once. Then again. Then again. I didn't pick it up immediately. I let it vibrate against the center console while I listened to the tick of cooling metal and the distant echo of a neighbor's wind chimes. Only after the buzzing stopped did I finally glance down. 16 unread messages in the group chat. The top one was from Ryan. Then Mom. Then Dad. I didn't open them. Not yet. Because sometimes the most satisfying sound in the world isn't applause or congratulations, it's silence, right after you've made a move no one saw coming. And I wasn't ready to break it just yet. There is a particular tone embedded in certain messages that no amount of punctuation or exclamation marks can disguise, a kind of clipped politeness so rehearsed and strained that it might as well be a sigh dressed up in letters. And when my mother finally responded in the group chat that afternoon, her message was exactly what I expected and somehow even more revealing than if she'd said nothing at all. It came about 30 minutes after the Tesla video had been posted, after what I can only imagine was a private flurry of behind-the-scenes texts between her and Ryan. Maybe even a panicked call to my father as she tried to decipher what I meant by such a bold, unapologetic move without asking me directly. And when I finally opened the thread, what stared back at me was her message, dry and weightless, as if it had been wrung out of her fingers reluctantly. Wow, that's quite a car. Just that. No question, no heart, no follow-up. No curiosity about how I paid for it, no acknowledgement of the achievement it represented, not even a half-hearted, "you deserve it," tacked on the end to pretend like we were all playing nice. It wasn't about the car for them, not really, and it hadn't been for me either, if I was being honest, because the Tesla was just a symbol, a quiet explosion meant to rupture the family script that had cast me as the modest, manageable daughter, the one who never made waves or drew too much attention. And yet, standing in the kitchen with my phone in hand, rereading that short, deflated response from the woman who raised me, I felt the heat rise in my chest in a way I hadn't expected, because the thing about silence is that when you finally choose to break it, when you finally say something without speaking at all, and the people you need to hear it look the other way, it doesn't make you feel powerful, it makes you feel like a fool for expecting anything else. Ryan followed quickly after her, of course, because he couldn't let any moment go by without adding his own flavor of detached charm. His message was a little longer, a little looser, and built around that strange blend of feigned admiration and undercutting disbelief he had perfected since we were kids. Damn, going full Elon now? You hiding a lottery ticket or something? He had always done that, pretended that my success was a fluke, a lucky break, a twist of fate rather than the direct result of years of discipline and self-denial. He made jokes because if he acknowledged the reality behind them, he'd have to face the fact that I had built a life with more substance and structure than he ever had, and that would mean seeing me clearly. And seeing me clearly meant losing the illusion that he was the star of the show. Dad's response came last, and, true to form, it was short and factual, the kind of message that avoided emotion at all costs, as though acknowledging feelings might accidentally open a floodgate neither he nor anyone else knew how to close. Nice. Just be careful with insurance. Teslas get expensive to fix. That was it. 3 responses. None of them asked a single question. None of them congratulated me. None of them showed the slightest spark of genuine interest. It was as though they were talking about something abstract, not the largest purchase I had ever made or the boldest statement I had ever dropped into their curated, carefully balanced family space. And somehow that cold, mechanical distance hit me harder than I'd anticipated. But I didn't reply. Not immediately. Because what could I say? What did they deserve to hear? I wasn't interested in defending myself or pretending their disapproval hadn't landed where it always landed on the part of me that still, even after all these years, wondered what it might feel like to walk into a room and be met with full, undiluted recognition. Instead, I poured a glass of wine, sat on the edge of my couch, and thought about the dinner that was now just a few days away, the annual family Christmas Eve dinner, which Mom had already assigned roles for weeks ago. Down to who would bring the green beans and who would light the candles, and how long we were allowed to stay before she got too tired to entertain. I had planned to go, of course, I always did, always showed up, always smiled through it even when the tension made my temples ache. But now, sitting in my living room with the snow falling quietly outside and the Tesla resting in the garage like a promise I had finally kept to myself, I began to feel something shift. Not anger, exactly. Not rebellion. But distance. Cold, deliberate, earned distance. I didn't want to cancel. I wanted them to see me. In person. Up close. I wanted to sit at that dinner table with their reactions still fresh and their questions still locked behind tight-lipped smiles. I wanted to hear how they would skirt around the subject, how they would find ways to avoid mentioning what I had done, how they would twist the conversation back to Ryan, back to comfort, back to the old script that no longer applied. And so I replied, hours later, long after their curiosity had probably faded into private chatter. I wrote, "It's been a good year." Figured it was time to stop living small. That was it. No apology. No humility. No invitation to ask for details. And they didn't. Not a single follow-up message. The group chat went quiet for the rest of the night, and the next day, it picked up again as if nothing had happened, with Mom sharing a recipe for cranberry salad and Ryan dropping a photo of his dog in a Santa hat. Business as usual. Which told me everything I needed to know. They had seen it. They had felt it. And they had decided to pretend it didn't matter. But I knew better. I knew what silence meant in my family. It wasn't peace, it was suppression. And now that I'd cracked that silence, even just a little, they would spend the rest of the holiday pretending nothing had changed, even though everything had. And deep down, I think they knew that this was no longer about the car. It was about the fact that I had stopped asking for space. And had taken it instead. The morning of Christmas Eve arrived with the same dull gray sky that had blanketed the city all week, the kind of overcast that seemed to press down on rooftops and tree branches alike, leaving everything slightly muted, like the world had collectively agreed to keep its voice low. I woke up early, not out of excitement or any sense of holiday spirit, but because I couldn't sleep. My mind had been pacing through the night, tracing imaginary conversations I wasn't even sure would happen, and by the time I stepped into the shower, I already felt the weight of what I was about to walk into. Not just because it was Christmas Eve and family obligations loomed, but because I knew that this year, more than any before it, I would be stepping into that house not as the quiet, agreeable daughter who stayed in the background, but as the one who had disrupted the system, shaken the frame, and done so without a single word of explanation. I dressed carefully, not extravagantly, but deliberately: dark jeans, a tailored wool coat, boots that added 2 inches to my height, and a cashmere scarf I had bought for myself the same week as the car, not because I needed it, but because it was soft, well-made, and elegant, and for once, I didn't want to dress down to make others feel comfortable. The Tesla sat outside in the driveway like a final punctuation mark to the sentence I had started with my silence, and when I slid into the driver's seat, the quiet hum of the cabin felt like a shield, insulating me from whatever version of the evening awaited on the other end of the drive. The house looked exactly the same as it always did this time of year, lights strung along the gutters with one always flickering near the end, Mom's plastic snowman stationed just off the porch like a weary sentry, and the distinct scent of cinnamon, ham, and a touch of artificial pine wafting through the door as soon as it opened. She greeted me with a tight smile, not quite strained but cautious, like someone reaching for a familiar tune on an instrument that's suddenly out of tune. We exchanged hellos, brief hugs, and I stepped inside, boots clicking on the tile like footsteps in a hallway that wasn't meant for echo. Ryan was already there, of course, lounging on the living room couch with a glass of something amber in his hand, dressed like he was headed to a casual brunch rather than a family holiday, and he barely glanced up when I walked in. But I caught the subtle flick of his eyes as they darted toward the front window, confirming, without a doubt, that he had seen the Tesla in the driveway. His smirk was faint, but it was there, curling at the corner of his mouth like he'd just confirmed a long-held suspicion about me and now couldn't wait to share it. Dinner passed the way most things in our family passed, under the cover of routine, cloaked in shallow conversation about the weather, football scores, rising grocery prices, and passive nods to the past. Plates were passed, hands reached across the table, and every now and then, someone would laugh a little too loudly, as if trying to conjure up warmth that hadn't arrived. They didn't mention the car. Not once. Not even in jest. But the silence around it was thick, almost reverent, like they were collectively pretending not to see the elephant in the driveway dressed in pearl white. It wasn't until after dessert, once the table had been cleared and the wine had been poured again and the mood had loosened just slightly, that the moment finally arrived, not because anyone planned it, but because eventually, all silence begs to be broken. It was Ryan, of course, who did it. He leaned back in his chair, swirled the remnants of his drink, and said, with a casualness that felt entirely manufactured, "So, tell me, when did you decide you were rich and mysterious?" There was a laugh buried in his voice, but it was hollow, forced, the kind of humor people use when they're testing how far they can push without being pushed back. The room went quiet, not dramatically, not with shock, but with the kind of subtle tightening you feel when everyone realizes a boundary is about to be tested. I looked at him for a long moment before answering, not because I needed to find the words, but because I wanted to give the silence a chance to settle first. Then I said, when I realized I didn't need permission to be seen. He blinked once, then let out a short, disbelieving breath, like he couldn't decide whether to be impressed or offended. "So this is a statement now?" he asked. "The car, the mystery. What, revenge?" Mom shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers fiddling with a napkin that no longer had anything to wipe, and Dad stayed still, eyes fixed on a spot on the table, as though the conversation had nothing to do with him. For a moment, it felt like I was standing in front of a jury that had no interest in evidence, just the performance of the verdict. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I just said, "It's not revenge. It's recognition. Of myself." Since no one else ever seemed interested in offering it. Ryan's smile faded slightly, and Mom finally said something soft and uncertain. "We always knew you had your life together. You just never flaunted it." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the exact kind of backward praise I had grown up on, compliments laced with blame, approval wrapped in reprimand. I took a breath, steadied myself, and replied, "I wasn't flaunting it. I was correcting the narrative. You all built a version of me that was smaller than I really am. I just stopped playing along." The room sat in that discomfort for a while, no one quite ready to move, to stand, to shift the energy back into something digestible. Eventually, someone changed the subject, Dad, maybe asking about traffic or the weather tomorrow, and slowly, the conversation resumed its safe, familiar rhythm, but I was already elsewhere, already outside that bubble. Watching it from a distance I hadn't known I was capable of creating. When I left that night, the air was colder than it had been all week, sharp against my cheeks as I walked back to the car, keys in hand. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. I slid into the driver's seat, pressed the pedal, and the car glided forward in silence, smooth and unbothered, taking me further and further away from the version of myself I had been required to perform for far too long. And as the night stretched out around me, streetlights blinking through the windshield like quiet confessions, I realized something that made my grip on the wheel tighten just slightly, not from fear or doubt, but from clarity. They were never going to give me what I needed. And maybe, just maybe, they never could. But that didn't mean I had to keep asking. Because there's something unshakable about choosing to write your own ending, especially when the story they gave you never had a place for the kind of woman you turned out to be.